I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Ms. Jim Leslie. And
Meditation.
Jim holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, is a retired border service officer, an active member of law enforcement against Prohibition and Stop the Violence, BC. Is a medical cannabis patient and an 18-year activist for cannabis policy reform. After working in the medical cannabis industry in Vancouver, BC for 1.5 years, Jim returned to the West Kootenays where he and his partners opened Grand Forks' first medical cannabis dispensary, the Kootenays Medicine Tree. So we're very happy to have you, Jim. And his topic today is medical cannabis history, human health, and access. Jim.
Well, thank you, and thank you everyone for having me. It's a very important topic. I think no matter what side of the issue, there are many sides that you could possibly sit on. All I'm going to try and accomplish today is maybe just talk about my own experience in this industry and a little bit about the science and the plant and what we're seeing and what we can expect in the future maybe. And maybe a little bit about next year, where all that's going, and what's happening in town here with the new bylaw amendment coming up for review. So I do have a variety of information to sort of go through, but if anybody wants to ask any questions or just feel free to say something whenever you feel like it. I do not consider it an interruption. In fact, it can focus me sometimes. So. First thing I'm going to do, and I apologize if there are not enough of these, but these are, this is a handout, and it's a variety of links you can go to on the internet where you can find peer-reviewed, published scientific information on cannabis and its constituent compounds. So it's very valuable. There's a lot of great information here. So if you're interested in doing your own research, I would suggest you do that. Check the things I'm saying and have a good look at what scientists are saying, and I think you'll all be fairly surprised and impressed and blown away at where we're at right now with this plant for humanity. Not just humanity, but all life, including animals that benefit from its use, and what the plant can do for our consciousness during this time as things are changing very rapidly around the world. So generally I have a fancy PowerPoint presentation, so I just pointed slides, but I'll just sort of skim through some of the notes and the information that we cover in the presentation. And I know time is finite, so I'll try and be concise. So we have legal medical cannabis in this country, and we've had it since 2001. So just so everyone's clear, Health Canada, which administers the, right now it's morphed through 3 different changes, but Health Canada administers the regulations that allow people to use cannabis as a medicine legally and have an exemption from the Drug Act, so you do not get prosecuted or arrested to do so. So there is a program, and there has been for quite some time, 15 years. And it didn't originate because the government was responsive to the needs of Canadians who use this as a medicine. They did so because they were forced to drag kicking and screaming by the Ontario Court of Appeal. The reason was there was a man named Terry Parker. He was featured on the news a lot around that time. He'd been arrested and charged for producing cannabis for his own medical use. He suffers from epilepsy, and he legitimately needed it to curb his seizures. So he can't afford to buy it off the street, nor should he have to, so he's growing it at home. I think in his balcony or wherever he was in his apartment, he gets caught. He goes to court. He makes it through the initial 2 stages of court. He ends up in the Ontario Court of Appeal, which is the highest court in the land in that province. And the judges looked at the charges and said, no. Because Mr. Parker is forced to choose between his health and his liberty, that is, he either chooses his health and he grows it illegally, or he doesn't grow it and his health suffers. But if he grows it illegally, he can go to prison. So it's either he loses his liberty by choosing to go after something that can help his health, or he chooses to be less healthy and suffer more because he doesn't want to go to jail. That choice is completely unjust, and the court found it to be unjust, found it to be a violation of his Section 7 charter rights under the Constitution Act of Canada. So what that led to, the court basically said to the government, you have 1 year to change these regulations or to come up with regulations to allow this, because if you don't, then we're going to strike down all the laws against cannabis, which would apply in Ontario, but would also be taken across the country as it would be case law that could be used in other jurisdictions. So that forced them to create the program. They created it. They've been, every time we get greater access or better service from Health Canada, we got it because we beat them in court. That was the only way. They're very much against this, and they have been for quite some time. So fast forward, things have changed now. We've actually had some major court victories again recently, but we can get into that later. So just to let everyone know, it is legal. However, it is not legal, technically, to buy it from dispensaries, which is what I run. The company that I'm a part of runs 2 medical cannabis dispensaries, one in Grand Forks, one in Nelson. We are what is referred to as gray market business. So we're not black market, but we're also not regulated. We're considered to be an activist business in the sense of, for 18 years in this country, people like myself have started either nonprofit societies or corporations and provided these services in an over-the-counter fashion to people who can prove a medical need. And the reason we did that is there was a big gap between what the government would allow people to do and what the people needed. And the only way to bridge that gap was activist business. So they exist out of necessity, not because we're flouting the law or that we want to make a bunch of money. We exist, most of us are doing this and have been doing this at great risk to ourselves. Potential prison time hanging over our heads because we believe in what we're doing and we're helping people every day, and it's measurable. So I think perhaps we'll come back to that area in a bit, but we can talk a little bit about the plant and why we're all so focused on it. So cannabis has been around humans ever since we have basically been humans, and operating in groups, and we've been growing cannabis and using cannabis for fiber. The Chinese were doing so back in 4000 BC. The first actual written evidence of medical use is 3000 BC in China. And they're using it for the same reasons that we use it now. Neuropathic pain, arthritis, a variety of issues. Anything regarding pain, inflammation, seizures, tremors, spasms. I mean, you can touch all kinds of different conditions. Now, across history, almost every culture has a link to this plant. People tend to cultivate it, bring it with them. It's been used in religious ceremonies, it's been used medically, it's been used so-called recreationally. But when we actually look at cannabis and what it does in the human body, we do understand through the science that there is no such thing, in my view, as non-medical use, really. You can think of it like this. Somebody might use cannabis to party with, or to have a good time, or to enjoy music, or creating music, and that's great. But that doesn't stop the compounds in their body from also preventing the onset of Alzheimer's, or cancer, or dealing with neuropathic pain, or dealing with issues of functional motility in the gut. So people, especially people who don't have any clear medical issues, those who are using it on the weekends, are doing us all a favor, even if they smoke it, because they'll be healthier, they'll live longer, and there'll be less of a drain on the medical system. The reason is that in the human body, we have a physiologic system that was only discovered in 1988. That's extremely recently. Now this system is the most important system in the human body. It's called the endogenous cannabinoid system. Everybody in this room, no matter your view on cannabis, your body manufactures your own THC. One of the compounds from cannabis, there are compounds in your body that look exactly like THC. They bond to the same receptors and they have a very important purpose. They are basically here to provide homeostasis. Does everyone know homeostasis? Balance, life-giving balance. So to allow a complex multi-celled organism to live in an ever-changing environment that the world is, we need the ability to respond real time in ways, for instance, if you're controlling temperature, whether it's cold or hot outside, it does that. It also controls how cells communicate between each other, how tissue functions. It controls actual processes within cells. So we're talking intracellular and intercellular. If you think of it like this, 600 million years ago, we had the first evidence of the endogenous cannabinoid system coming in sea squirts and nematodes coming out of the primordial sea. These things then, through evolution, this endogenous cannabinoid system is, we believe, present in all complex life. And it's present in all complex life that has been checked so far. Animals, reptiles, amphibians, they have receptors for these compounds. So all life needs these compounds that are manufactured on demand in the body to do things like controlling balance and function. So if you can't control the function of tissue working together in a complex organism, you will die, basically, is how that works. So this system is extremely important, and it's tied into life itself. So if you think of it on that level, and you look around nature, and you try and find compounds that can interact with this system in all of us, we've come to the cannabis plant. I prefer not to say marijuana. It has roots in historical prejudice, and it was used almost to make it, to demonize it as a plant and the people who use it. So I like to say cannabis. I use its Latin terminology. So there's a variety, I'm just going to skip ahead here. I'm going to get through some of the morphology of the plant here in a second, but when we talk about these receptors, this, to give you an example, is everyone familiar with things like serotonin and dopamine, compounds that are produced and have little receptors on the outside of cells they bond to, and the bonding to these receptors causes function or things to happen? So if you think about these receptors for cannabinoids in your body, there are many receptors for cannabinoids, but the two that are named right now are cannabinoid receptor 1 and cannabinoid receptor 2. They are abbreviated as CB1 and CB2. So CB1 is located in great density in your brain, your spinal cord, and the central nervous system. Your CB2 receptors tend to be in the peripheral nervous system, your immune system. But typically, here's where you're going to find these receptors in the neurological, circulatory, endocrine, digestive, musculoskeletal systems, and even cartilage tissue. It's everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And you need it. You need it to control function and everything. For instance, there's receptors for cannabinoids in your bones, in your bone cells, on the surfaces of your bone cells. What happens is, when your endocannabinoids are doing their job, we all have good bone density. But as we age, the theory is that our endocannabinoids start to be underproduced. Well, guess what? You start to have a lot of different issues all around the body, whether it's dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, neurodegenerative disorders. We look at bone loss, osteoporosis. These seem to be functions of, or resulting from, age-related neurodegeneration, or the inefficiencies of producing endocannabinoids as we age. So this is a big deal. When we're looking at what this system controls specifically, we're looking at pain, reproduction, memory, appetite, sexual function and behavior. Literally everything of importance to us as organisms is controlled by this. Now, when you have an idea of how important the system is, and all of us have been usually to specialists in the medical system, right? Whether it's rheumatoid arthritis or pain or oncology, we are going to medical specialists who are trying to help us more than a GP can address specific medical issues. And in almost every single case, there is a role for this system to play in regaining your health, whatever you're facing. And the shortcomings of the medical system now are that many physicians are not educated or not aware and informed about the science. It's not that it hasn't been studied enough, it's that they're not actually looking at it enough. They're not bringing this into their day-to-day. You know, they're trained by pharmaceutical companies. So when someone goes to a pain specialist and says, I have significant inflammatory related pain related to my rheumatoid arthritis, they will eventually end up on prescription anti-inflammatories and possibly opiate drugs. And that's it. That's all they can do for you. We see people like that come through our door almost every day, and we start to bridge that gap with cannabinoids for pain relief, and guess what? No toxicity to the liver. And you can generally get people off of these pharmaceuticals with their physician's supervision, I might add. I am not a doctor and I don't pretend to be, but I know about these compounds and these products. So we can provide the dose protocol advice, and the physicians will provide, hopefully, the oversight that these people deserve, and hopefully learn something and then start to bring it into their practice. But if you go to an oncologist, you know, and they give you, for cancer treatment, radiation or chemo, and they don't tell you that to support the body during these two types of treatments that are, you know, very hard on the body in other areas, use cannabis. Cannabis is, and the compounds in it are neuroprotective. They protect your nerve cells. They protect your tissue from damage, from ionizing radiation, for instance. So one of the things we see in chemotherapy or radiation treatment is if a person is going in for the treatment, they'll take cannabis before and after and throughout treatment, not during, because you don't want to overload the liver. Let the chemo do its job, but we're seeing people coming out of that much better with far less side effects and symptoms from the treatments they're choosing to take. The burns they get from radiation treatment, we can solve with cannabis creams and topicals that are amazing in their activity on damaged skin. So one important thing too, when we talk about memory and learning and the idea of forgetting, cannabinoids are intimately involved in the ability of the body and the mind to forget things, because we need to forget things. Now, this isn't talking about, you know, stoners who don't remember their name, and that's not really true. But we're talking about if you remembered every single thing you said or did in a day, you go insane. So we need to forget things naturally, and we need to move on from traumatic experience in our lives. So when you look at police officers, military people, or, you know, people who have been through crime or assaults in their own life, and they have post-traumatic stress disorder, right? This is a big, big issue, and it's a big, big problem. And one of the ways that you can actually help people start to move on from this trauma that they keep revisiting is to use cannabis. It doesn't wipe out your memory, but it allows you to heal and to let go of these issues. So my uncle is, one of my uncles, his name is Dr. Greg Passy. He is Canada's foremost expert on post-traumatic stress disorder. He's the guy that treats the RCMP officers that have real problems. He's the guy that treats the military officers that come back and have a lot to deal with. And he knows how well this works, so he uses it in his practice, and some of his compatriots do not, much to the detriment of their patients, I might add. So as we sort of fly around here, and feel free to jump in any time if anyone wants to ask any questions, but what we're looking for in the plant, to be specific, is coming not from the leaves, really. It's coming from the buds, the flowers. Does anyone not know what a cannabis bud is? Show of hands. So everyone pretty much knows what bud is if I refer to it? Okay. So when the female plants flower and express their flowers, they're also expressing resin. Resin glands, capitate stalk trichomes is what they're called. Trichome is a Greek word that means growth of hair. And they look like little hairs that grow up off the flesh of the plant, typically concentrated on the female flowers. Now, when you take down the plant and you dry the plant and you cut the flowers off and you trim them and you cure them, that is bud. And you can cut that up and you can smoke it or you can vaporize it. But what we're actually looking for is just those tiny little finger-like projections with a bulbous head on top. And in that bulbous head, in the resin gland, is the magic. That is where your medicinal compounds are. Literally, you can use the rest for your compost. You can do whatever you want with it. That's the medicine right there. So these glands are where it's at. And yeah, there's cannabinoids apparently in the root of the plant, and we're going to test for that, and that's something we're looking at. But this is mostly what we're looking for. So if somebody's making hash, the way you make hash typically in ancient times and still today is by physical or mechanical separation. You take the flowers when they're dry, and usually, hopefully, if it's cold outside or you can drop the temperature, they become quite brittle. And you can take your buds and put them on a screen with a certain pore size, and you shake them, or as they do in Morocco, beat them against silk, and the resin glands break off and they fall through the screen and they land on the bottom. And you push them all together and you crush it together and you press it with heat, and that is hash. That's all hash is. It's just a more purified version of cannabis that has less plant material, and you didn't use a solvent to get it. Now what we're looking for in that resin gland are 3 types of compounds, and 2 of them don't really matter right now. We're talking mostly about the first type, but they are called cannabinoids. THC, does everyone know the one that gets you high? Also the one that kills cancer cells and shrinks tumors, THC. That compound is a cannabinoid. That's the family it comes from. There's also, there's approximately upwards of 120 different cannabinoids that are found in cannabis. There are hundreds of different types of cannabis plants that express different quantities of these compounds. That's why there's so many different strains, if you will. There's a reason for it. They do different things. They have different uses. There's another type of therapeutic compound called terpenes. Terpenes are aromatic flavor and taste smell compounds. They are found in fruits and vegetables and flowers and pine needles in nature. In your essential oils and your misters at home, those are terpenes. Those are the active medicinal ingredients in essential oil. So if you look at, for instance, we can look at lilacs. Lilacs express something called terpinolene. And terpinolene is also expressed by cannabis. And strangely enough, when you have relatively high amounts of terpinolene and THC, they synergize together and provide sedation. So certain strains, maybe like a purple kush, which most people would find relaxing before bed, there's a reason for that. And that's because these other compounds are synergizing with THC and other cannabinoids and providing specific benefits. These terpenes are upwards of 200 different ones you can find in cannabis in the resin glands. Many of them, like myrcene, is expressed in mangoes. Alpha-pinene is expressed in pine needles. We're working with these now. We're starting to pull them out and isolate them and mix them into oils and stuff. But it's really, really important. They can be antimicrobial, they can be anti-cancer, they can be antidepressant, anti-anxiety, sedative. And the last one is flavonoids, and there's about 20 of them that we know of, and one of them I know of is apigenin, which is the flavonoid you find in chamomile tea, which is what relaxes you. That's in cannabis too. So when you look at all these types of compounds working together, that's why the pharmaceutical companies are so threatened, because A, this is the safest substance on the planet that we're aware of in science. You cannot die from eating or taking too much cannabis. Hasn't happened yet. So over the history of human use, and people have tried, they have taken copious amounts of cannabis and sustained copious doses for long periods of time. There is no lethality. And the reason is, when you look in the base of the brain and the brainstem, which controls autonomic function, things that you don't think of to control, like your heart rate and your breathing, there are no receptors for cannabinoids there. But there are receptors for opiates. That's why you can overdose relatively easy on fentanyl, OxyContin, morphine. It can shut your breathing down, you'll die. Cannabis doesn't do that. Cannabis also doesn't kill healthy cells, even in high doses. It protects cells. What we found is in research in high doses, cannabinoids seem to bring on something called neurogenesis, which is the creation and growth of new cells in the brain, in the hippocampus, in the centers of long-term memory, for instance. Neurogenesis. So when we talk about people who are dealing with damaged brains from concussions from sport or assault, or degenerative brain disorders like Alzheimer's and this plaque that builds up in the brain, these compounds can go into the brain, and research is showing us they can protect the cells that are traumatized, heal some of the cells, and if the cells are already too far gone, they naturally self-digest and are taken away. In their place, we are seeing neurogenesis. That's probably one of the reasons why when we see Alzheimer's patients in dementia, and they come out of dementia on cannabis, that's probably one of the factors that's behind that. So, and it's quite incredible. There's a documentary on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, you should. It's called The Scientist. It's about Dr. Raphael Mechoulam in Israel and his team who discovered THC in 1964. They discovered the endocannabinoid system in 1988. They discovered and named the first endogenous cannabinoid found in the human brain called anandamide. Ananda, Sanskrit for bliss. So just plug it in, The Scientist and Cannabis on YouTube. Watch it. It's heartwarming, it's hilarious, and it's inspiring because they've done incredible research, and to this day the politicization of cannabis and the criminalization of it has hampered their efforts to something that is so non-toxic, safe, and should be used by people of all ages.
What's the name of the YouTube?
It's called The Scientist.
The Scientist.
But just don't search The Scientist, because there's also a rock and roll song called The Scientist. So say The Scientist and Cannabis, and you will get it. And it's free. It's awesome. So, I mean, we're looking at things like, for instance, if we look at animal models and experiments, they took rodents recently, and they didn't give them THC from cannabis. They gave them this synthesized 200 times the potency of THC cannabinoid that they made in the lab, right? And they hammered these mice for 30 days with doses that would be hundreds of times the highest dose humans could take realistically in their day. And they were trying to show an effect, a negative effect, or whatever effect they could find. And they did find an effect. But what happened was these mice actually seemed to function cognitively better after 30 days than worse. They did stress tests and maze tests where they would submerge a platform under the water, and they would find that, for instance, they'd take another type of mouse called a knockout mouse, which is a mouse they create where they have no CB1 receptors in their brain. These mice die earlier. They have a very fearful outlook on their life. They're a lot like people that vote for Harper, actually. Knockout humans, right? Very fearful, very collapsed worldview, very bent on taking things away from people and being safe. And, that is an under-functioning endocannabinoid system, or one that doesn't exist. So these mice that had all this cannabis or all this synthetic THC would find that platform faster and faster, no matter where they moved it. They were doing better over time. And in my world, that's what we see too, whether they have brain injury, like my good friend and fellow business partner Wendy Briscoe, who we founded this company with. She had such a severe brain injury and a whole host of other issues, including a tumor on her pineal gland in her brain. But Wendy was in some severe car accidents. Her brain was damaged so much that she couldn't walk. She had no sense of balance. She was in a wheelchair. Today, she walks with a cane, and she is functional, and she has repaired her brain with cannabis to the extent that her physicians are blown away. They had no idea this could happen. They don't read the research, which indicates it, but what we're seeing in real time is we don't have clinical trials on every which way to use this stuff and all these advanced type of delivery systems with which to take it and get it farther into the body and affect tumors. But what we do know is, because it's safe and effective, we can see people using it in their day-to-day life, and they're getting all kinds of incredible benefits. Some symptom control, some pushing cancer apparently into permanent remission. Some call that a cure. I don't want to be irresponsible, but we have people in our membership that are cancer-free now, including a 5-year-old boy who has terminal kidney cancer. So it works. But it doesn't work the same for everybody, and I think that's the challenge. Genetically speaking, we need to know why. Certain genes probably playing a role in certain people, but the topic is wide-ranging and absolutely incredible. I'll read you a quote that I read out in class for learning and retirement this last week here, because this gets to the heart of learning and being open-minded as we grow and age, and to keep being that way, because I think it's beneficial for ourselves as humans and the world we live in. So if you think about neurogenesis and how cannabinoids, whether it's in your own body or whether you're taking it in from the plant, are causing new cells to grow to help you as a being, whether it's in your brain or other places. This says, by mediating neurogenesis and the plasticity of neurons and learning, cannabinoids may directly influence a person's open-mindedness and the ability to move beyond limiting patterns of thought and behavior from past situations. How fast do we learn from our mistakes? Cannabinoids help with that. By reformatting these old patterns, it is an essential part of health in our quickly changing environment. There is a clear link to being open-minded and intelligent and forward-thinking and having a balanced, supplemented endocannabinoid system. And that's just to be a functional being, never mind if you're sick or you have other issues. There's another issue too. Beyond medical use and beyond so-called recreational use, we have enhancement effects. And enhancement effects are making you perform better. Not just fixing a deficit, but making you better, more intelligent, a better artist, a better thinker, a better scientist, a better author. Used, I think, in a very specific way for specific people, we are seeing that. I know people who have been using cannabis over much of their life, and I've seen them grow as a person and become seemingly more intelligent over time. Whereas, there's this whole cesspool of mainstream media, professional sports, and the right-left paradigm of society and politics that draws a lot of our intellect out and has us eating bad food that's advertised on these programs. But basically, there's many different uses. Sorry, I'll just pass around these cards as well. I just want people to have a link to our website because we have some videos that we've been producing on YouTube where we deal with very specific topics. They're 2 minutes long and they're just based on fact. But another thing that we see with cannabis is basically using it for chronic non-cancer pain. So people who have pain in their life from accidents or injuries or whatever, using opiates, been on opiates for 20 years, are addicted in many cases. And many of them are able to immediately reduce their opiate dose and eventually get off of opiates entirely, and that includes OxyContin. And we've had great success with that.
Terry, Tom,
Jim.
I obviously need more cannabis. Doug, I guess one of the things that has struck me is that there seems to be has been a sort of social response to paying attention to genetic picking of plants.
Yes.
To try and create the most potent high.
Right. That's right.
But I'm starting to get a sense from what you're saying is that there may actually be ways of starting to pay attention to selecting for different cannabinoids that are not actually THC related.
Yes. That's an excellent point, and I should have addressed that earlier. Much of the backbone of what we do in this industry now is based on CBD, cannabidiol. CBD is the second most known cannabinoid, and it comes from many different types of cannabis plants, but there's no high with CBD. There's a high with THC, and the high can be useful, but if you need a certain level of THC, we need to get you up gradually so you don't have a profound experience that you're not looking for. And that can hamper some people in trying to use cannabis as a medicine. So what we found is there are now plants being selectively bred that express higher amounts of CBD than THC, or even equivalent amounts. And what we find is we're very much based on concentrates and oil. We sell the flowers and the dried bud, but we are into testing our oil, manufacturing on demand specific profiles of medicine, THC and CBC, or well, CBC too, but CBD, for people's needs. And whether it's pain, inflammation, epilepsy, arthritis, autism in children. That's really where a lot of this is coming from, is the multiplicity of cannabinoids and what is called the entourage effect. That these cannabinoids are much more beneficial when they work in tandem than when they are separated. And that's why the pharmaceutical companies failed when they made an isolated THC. It is far more, it has far more side effects in regards to negativity that you would get from being extremely high than actual plant cannabis. So synthetic THC, Marinol and such that you get in the pharmacy, you get way higher off that than plant cannabis. And the CBD actually is very useful because anyone can start taking it. And there's no high. It treats anxiety like you wouldn't believe. It's going to replace all Valium and all sorts of other drugs and barbiturates. And it also kills cancer cells and shrinks tumors and protects people from Alzheimer's and all kinds of things.
Have you had any experience with schizophrenia?
Yes, schizophrenia, actually there is some information and studies recently done on comparing atypical schizophrenic medication with CBD, and they found the effects to be equivalent, but the CBD had no side effects and had no liver toxicity, of course. So, huge advantage in mental illness. There's a big role for cannabis to play, but specific cannabinoids, not necessarily THC. So schizophrenia is one that CBD for sure, and something called CBG, which is cannabigerol, that has great effect likely in mood disorders and bipolar disorder. So we're looking to produce plants with higher amounts of that compound.
Does it control some of the dopamine going on?
Yes, it does. Yeah, actually, interestingly enough, the research points to the interrupting factor in the addictive cycle of using drugs or being addicted to other things. So in the reward-pleasure mechanism in the brain, the nucleus accumbens, you have dopamine release in response to pleasurable activities, taking drugs, sex, jumping out of airplanes. It's normal to experience pleasure, but it's not normal to have this hardwired into you so that you start using or doing something to the detriment of yourself. So that's a very powerful thing to break. And what CBD seems to do, again, because cannabinoids modulate or bring balance to function, CBD seems to go in there, and when it's bonding to receptors, it's modulating the release of the dopamine in that pleasure-reward circuitry. So when a person, and we see this a lot, and we get this feedback, people who drink a lot, or take cocaine, or smoke cigarettes, if they take CBD, and they come into our dispensary, and they take it every day, for whatever reason they're using it for, and it usually isn't the addiction, they start to do that thing less. And we've seen it in men and women of all ages. Where I worked in Vancouver, we had a dispensary in the 800 block of East Hastings Street in the downtown east side. We worked very much with heavily addicted people, and it worked like a hot dam. And we started to see the research play out in day-to-day reality. And you know, we had a woman come in and see us with anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder. We see many women actually with that disorder. Not really a disorder, it's a condition. People are anxious, so it is. But she comes in and she binge drinks every 2 weeks because she can't take it. But when the 2 weeks goes by, she has to do something to take the edge off. So she starts taking CBD. She stopped binge drinking. She didn't even think about it. And that's the thing with this. People who have benefited from this, they're not taking it and necessarily trying to do this. It's something that's happening naturally because of what's going on inside. Yeah.
I've got a lot of questions. We'll talk later. But I like the idea, considering what's happening with opioids and the press that they're getting and the challenges that they're creating, and you know, the cannabinoid.
It's a trippy word.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Like Canada.
So here's my question is, you know, you're an advocate and you're obviously advocating. I also want to hear about the challenges of this. And so my specific questions are, you know, the different derivatives, the different kinds, all that is really very confusing.
Mm-hmm. It is.
For someone who's even looked at it and tried to figure it out, you know, what the different letters mean and stand for, and doses and percentages and all that.
That's
and
right.
then I'm going to, who is it that's telling me that?
Yes.
you know, over the counter or yourself, you know, you said you're not a doctor, but you speak very well on this, and I get it. But I also gotta hear the balance of that, you know.
Right.
And what about the effect on, the biggest question is I'm hearing is about young people
Sure.
that are using it and what happens. And what about the picture of, you know, the person who smokes this every morning and doesn't want to get out of,
Sure.
just wants to turn the stereo on and listen to whatever.
Yeah, we'll address all that. And so you will never get, and I say this, at a basic level, there is no other side to this. At a general, basic, scientific, factual level, if we discuss endocannabinoid system, what it does, how the plant interplays, there's no other side to that. That's what it does. However, how do people use it is more the issue. So physicians, unfortunately, because they lack the education, generally, if they're going to give you, quote unquote, the other side, it's going to be laced with myths and falsehoods and exaggerations that they don't personally know about, but they may have read some studies which had very bad methodology, that have basically been wiped out. No one listens to them. The researchers were ashamed and sort of roundly dismissed, but it still comes up. I think a couple things there. So let's deal with the so-called anti-motivational syndrome.
Yep.
There's no such thing. Cannabis doesn't cause that. But what I will say is there are lazy people in society. Now, these lazy people, if they're not smoking joints in the morning, they might drink alcohol. They might chronically masturbate. I don't mean to disgust anybody, but that's what happens. They can be addicted to junk food. They can be addicted to soap operas. At that level of needing a crutch to get through life, cannabis is useful to people in that position because it is the safest crutch you can lean on, the least toxic. And while that's not a healthy way to use cannabis, it is certainly the least harmful crutch a person can use. Now, the proportion of people who use cannabis in that fashion, statistics point to a figure of around 9%. In my own experience, and in those of my peers and people who have been around this for many years, we're looking more around 2 or 3%.
I get it.
Yeah.
So about all the derivatives and the confusion about the different types, how it's consumed is
That's
another
right.
thing, because now there's gummy bears and
Yes.
teas and everything else, you know.
You really, and here's the thing, because this is something that's coming out of the black market, and the powers that be haven't wanted to touch this. Right now, and for the meantime, unless you're talking to PhDs in laboratories who are doing this research, the people that know the most about it are going to be people like myself. Now, you know, I certainly have a dog in this race, but I personally, in our company, and I think you need to go based on each individual company, even if they're federally licensed, they're not all good actors. You've really got to figure out who knows the science and who can best advise you on your dose and the products and who's making safe products. Because the federal guys who, you know, are under the mandatory testing regimes, I know a lot about them, don't know who those are. So that's the federal system. They're not all bad, but they're certainly not perfect. When it comes to information,
Using pesticides on their
using pesticides on their cannabis,
grow up.
yeah, you should not do that.
Of course not.
Yeah. So I mean, but this is the thing.
That's,
You know, we've seen in the United States, in states where it's legal, 86% of samples taken tested positive for banned pesticides. That is extremely immoral, profit-driven behavior. And that's why, you know, companies like the Kootenay's Medicine Tree, you know, I've been doing this for 18 years. I'm a criminologist, I'm a social scientist. But my heart's been in this, and I've been doing this for free for many years because I believe in it, because I've seen what it can do. But you know, in this town, for instance, there's a few dispensaries you can walk into. And I have dealt with people who have received advice at different dispensaries. Some of the advice I think is pretty on. Other advice is absolute craziness. It's just, one lady came to see us, and she'd been to a dispensary I won't name, and they never used cannabis before in her life. Now let's back up to the fact that if you ingest it orally, THC, that is the most psychoactive way to take it. It is the most powerful. It's also great for pain relief, but if you've never taken that before, you should not be eating it like that the first time. That's why, you know, in our company, we have measured tinctures with concentrations known, where we get people on the 5 milligram incremental dose increase for THC on a structured program. This other person walked in, got a gummy bear or a gummy something. It had 80 milligrams of THC in it, and she ate the whole thing. Can you believe that? I mean, that's that's a significant impact on your psyche. It's not gonna hurt you, but it's gonna scare the crap out of you. And it's probably, and in her case it didn't, but in many people's cases, it scares them away as something that can really help them. And I really, you know, we carry a gummy product because we were asked to do so by the membership. Some people who are in daily significant pain like a bit of sweets in their life, you know. So we got this organic, you know, non-dyed, non-GMO gummy for this particular set of patients, but particularly I don't really believe in that as a way to medicate. I don't think that's a serious medicine. Yeah.
My question is, I can't help but think that smoking any substance, never mind marijuana or cannabis, is bad for the lungs. What do you think about this?
Yeah, you're quite right. Smoking cannabis, you're getting tar, you're getting carcinogens, you know, anyone who tells you you're not is full of it. You're burning it. But the difference is this. Smoking cannabis, generally speaking, if you compare it to tobacco smokers, you're smoking less product overall, and you're generally speaking, over a lifetime, going to consume less that way. Now, they looked at cannabis and head, neck, and lung cancer in a major study for the U.S. government. And Donald Tashkin, Dr. Donald Tashkin, is the guy that does all the studies on emphysema and lung function and COPD for, you know, the U.S. feds. And he's not by any means committed to the cannabis industry at all. He went into this just like he does with everything else. I'm going to find out what the harm is. They did a massive review of tobacco smokers, cannabis-only smokers, cannabis and tobacco, and non-smokers. And what they found at the end of it was tobacco, yes, higher rates of cancer. Tobacco and cannabis smokers had lower rates of cancer than tobacco-only smokers, even though they smoked, you know, fairly equivalent amounts of product. The cannabis-only smokers actually had rates of lung, head, and neck cancer equivalent to, and in some cases better than non-smokers. So, and we're talking daily smoking of cannabis for years, you know, even copious amounts. And so what the thought is that THC and CBD and all these wonderful terpenes that are coming into your lungs and, you know, hitting the tissue in your alveolar sacs and getting through into your capillaries, into your pulmonary blood system and onwards into your body, these cannabinoids are actually providing anti-cancer effect while you're also putting tars and carcinogens into your lungs. So it seems like there's a balance there, and to the extent we're aware of, there has not been a case so far of cannabis-only smokers who've developed lung cancer. We don't see it. So in a pinch, if you don't have a vaporizer, which allows you to heat the cannabis below the temperature of burning so that it releases the active ingredients into a mist, that is safe. That's fine. But if you can't do that and you don't have that device, you can smoke it in a pinch. And the reason is rapid onset and relief of nausea, vomiting, and pain, generally speaking. Sometimes seizures or tremors. A fellow I know in Vancouver, his nickname is Crash. Watch him. If you go on, again, YouTube, David Suzuki, Nature of Things, 1996, medical marijuana. They went into the first dispensary in Canada, in Vancouver, and they had Crash, who's, you know, in his late 20s, and Crash can't sit still. He's just like this. He's shaking, right? And his mom rolls a joint, gets it in his mouth, gets a couple tokes into him, and in that segment, in 2 minutes, he goes from this to holding his own joint. That fast. And that's why smoking has been used by so many people.
If you don't want to smoke it, what is the effectiveness of my sister-in-law when she went through chemo for breast cancer, had some topical stuff, and she had some in honey and things like that. What is that just as effective?
It's great. In fact, the greatest therapeutic gains that we've ever seen have come from ingesting cannabis orally. You just have to know your dose. But typically, I see very healthy people, whether they're battling cancer or MS or epilepsy, that are generally they're taking an oral dose 2 to 3 times a day, and they're sustaining it. And again, because these compounds are interacting with your own system, and probably in many of our cases topping up a system that doesn't have enough, I personally don't believe in, you know, I don't know what the term is, dry spells or going without for a month. You hear this a lot by recreational smokers, and that's fine for them. There's a big difference though, if you're using this to fight back against something that you've just put into remission like cancer, I personally would not stop taking it. There's no deleterious effects from long-term use, in fact it's the opposite. So, but yeah, and more and more we're seeing the rectal administration of cannabinoids being used. Suppositories are a big thing in our dispensary. For instance, you can avoid getting high almost entirely by taking it the back door. And the reason is, if you get it into the rectum and you haven't had any damage or surgery, that's complicated matters there, just above the anus, that rectal wall, when that suppository melts through, it gets into the bloodstream, potentially up to 70% absorption, which is incredible. Oral is 5 to 20. And it's going to avoid the liver. When you eat it, it goes from the stomach to the liver. The liver actually metabolizes it into more psychoactive compounds. So if you get it through the rectum first, you avoid the liver, it goes into your bloodstream as THC, not 11-hydroxy-THC, which is much more potent and psychoactive. So it's all these types of ways of administration. There's another one too for cancer patients and others with some significant illness that we're also employing, and that is passing cannabinoids through membranes, penetrating through tissue. We've been using a dimethyl sulfoxide solvent, a DMSO, if people are familiar with that. It has some of its fans and detractors online, but the fact remains, if it's used professionally and if you know what you're doing, this stuff works like a hot damn. The reason why we use it is we want to get those cannabinoids deep into bones, into the brain, whatever, and DMSO helps us do that. It helps it go systemically. We only started doing that because of some work we did with another company, a great Canadian named David Calvert, who is an incredible man, an incredible healer, 30-year veteran herbalist, has helped many, many people, allowed us and taught us how to use DMSO, a certain dilution, with compounds. And we're actually, we provide one of their products in our dispensary called Sarracenia. It's a carnivorous flower, provincial flower in Newfoundland, and as it turns out, an extremely potent antiviral and anti-cancer compounds are in that. So we have a Sarracenia DMSO spray, and the treatment is you spray the feet. Light mist on the feet. When they're air dry, you can walk again, but do not do it on dirty skin. That will go into your bloodstream too. So you got to be careful, but it's a new way where we can penetrate deeper and hit areas where traditionally we had trouble. That's ahead of the scientists getting us there with like nanotechnology and stuff.
I hope they begin researching their roots at some time, because I had years ago, a positive experience. It cured my laryngitis, like right now. A friend of mine made some marijuana, a root tea for me, and it brought my voice back really fast.
It has some incredible antimicrobial properties. Like CBD, for instance, has been shown to kill MRSA, antibiotic-resistant staph. So, I mean, it killed it topically when applied. I think it was on the skin. There's a study out there that I can link to, but yeah, it has great benefit that way, quite likely. And there's many other uses that we're just coming upon too. Yeah. Yes.
In the 1960s and early 1970s, I worked for the National Student Association Drug Study and Educational Reform program.
Okay.
With the mandate to legalize marijuana. Awesome. And investigate the psychedelics and educate about the harder drugs. Mm-hmm. We ran college campuses, conferences all over northeastern United States. Very interesting people, got all the medical, sociological, psychological experts, bringing them together. And then a friend and I started a company called Amorphia, which sold cigarette papers, the sale of which would be used to legalize, legalize marijuana. Yeah. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I've recently gone online to sort of see what happened to some of those people. And I just find it extremely exciting and pleasing to see where we have come to, and to sit here in this room and hear you speak in the way that you have today. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, and I also want to thank you for laying the bedrock foundation, because if it wasn't for groups like yourself, there wouldn't have been the Dana Larsons and the Mark Emerys and everyone else who flowed out of them. Not that I want to hold Mark up as an example, but you know, he's good for certain things. But that's a very important thing, and it's something that we've been fighting for since 1923, probably when it was criminalized, and we're almost there. But it's in how that gets rolled out that there is a big concern, and I think for Nelson in this region, the biggest concern is being shut out of the new cannabis economy. And we do not want to see the licensed producer companies, which already have their foot in the door, which are already selling product, we don't want them to get license expansion alone. This needs to be our participatory market and economy. You need to see all sizes of business included, and particularly the roots of this culture, which is in this region, for, you know, not just British Columbia, but the country in North America. You know, Nelson in this region has a huge role to play. And I like what I'm seeing, but I worry too, because I know the guys, Canopy Growth Corporation, which has bought up Tweed and Bedrocan, two licensed producers. I know about Tilray on Vancouver Island, whose parent company, Privateer, is an American company. They've used cutthroat tactics since they came into our province. I was down in Vancouver when they were doing their stuff. And, you know, I had some of these people, I mean, I was talking to a representative of Canamed. Canamed is another bad actor, in my humble opinion. I was at not really a seminar, but sort of a charity event for Kyla, little Kyla Williams, who was a little girl who was seizuring 200 times a day. Now she's virtually seizure-free. We were the first ones to help her get to, you know, some measure of control on seizures. Well, that issue is that, you know, we're seeing all these massive companies come in, and they just want to take this market for profit. So I see Canamed with a table at this function for Kyla, and I go up to him. I've never had this chance in my life to talk to one of these people. And I said, hey, Canamed, you know, what's going on? What do you think? Would you like to do business with the rest of us? Can we link arms? Can we help more patients? He's like, no, that'll never happen. I said, no. I said, what if the field changes next year? He's like, his comment was, it's all about the money. Why not? Shh, you know? Now, I then said to him, because due to a court decision, these companies are allowed to make oils now. Limited though. CBD, there's no limit on the concentration, but the THC is limited to 30 milligrams per mil. That is very, very weak if you have cancer and you need to eat it to survive. So they have a ceiling on their products, and they're very expensive, some of them. Now, we're pretty close in the CBD cost, but the THC, I said, listen, man, we're getting a lot of your people come to us because the concentration we provide is stronger. It's tested just like yours is, and it's cheaper. So what do you got to say about that? And he just said, that's not true. You know? But these guys want the market for themselves, and they want to take, if this place gets involved, they want it to be because Tweed or some of these other companies come here and have another branch. And they're not going to let the people who are the artisan producers and the brains and the real backbone of this industry participate, and that can't happen. So these guys need to do that.
Just a question, what does it take for one to be able to walk in to a dispensary and purchase something?
Yeah.
Where are we at with, do I have to go to a doctor, what do I have to do? And what happens if I do try to grow something at home?
Well, I think right now, I mean, literally, if you stayed, you know, with a small amount of plants and got caught, you probably wouldn't be charged. You could be charged, but you probably wouldn't be. Like I know
Is it more
Sergeant.
legal than it was before? Or
No,
is
it's
it
still just as illegal to grow
It's
at
the
home
same.
unless you get a medical license to do it, which you can. That program is now open again, but
How do you get a medical license?
yeah. But to come into a dispensary like in our company, you don't need a prescription, quote unquote. You don't need a recommendation with cannabis. You just need a diagnosis. Show us your symptoms or condition, and we'll sign you up.
So you make the diagnosis?
No. So that will come from either old historical reports, diagnostics, MRIs, radiology reports, notes from your file. Your doctor could notate on a piece of paper, patient A suffers from arthritis. They don't have to say cannabis. When I met with the doctors before we did this, I said, you know, I know what situation you're in. I think we can help more people if we lower our bar a little bit, but still allow you guys to make the diagnosis. Now, physician, nurse practitioner, doctor of Chinese medicine, or naturopath all apply, or medical report completed for disability or some such thing signed by a physician. So, yeah, it's...
Have you had any success with people with leukemia?
Yeah, actually, leukemia tends to respond fairly well to cannabis. There's a great study, actually, that you can look at that two physicians did. It was a case report on a teenage girl, I think in Eastern Canada, and they were giving her cannabis oil, and it was knocking her leukemia down like nothing. She ended up dying due to complications, not from the leukemia, it was something else. But in our membership, we have people with leukemia, and THC seems to be, it responds well to it. It seems to kill leukemia.
When you say membership, is this a cost for membership? Or?
No, we don't charge for our membership. We just have you register. I mean, other clubs will charge you maybe 10, 20, 25 bucks a year or something, but, but it's, but right now, in this town, Sergeant Nathaniel Holt, who I'm well acquainted with, has said that as long as we're acting in good faith and we're not selling to minors, we're pretty much okay right now, and we're waiting for everything to settle next year, which I think will take 2 or 3 years, actually. I think this will be an election issue next election. I don't think it's going to get solved next year, but yeah.
And the most recent city council decision?
Well, see, November 7th, I believe, there is public input on this bylaw amendment that particularly prohibits dispensaries from opening in any zone in Nelson. So it prohibits them from starting up. I understand that is a tool they need to prevent the expansion and the growth of other dispensaries unchecked, and I can respect that, and I'm really glad we were the second ones to open here. It seems like it's going to grandfather all of us who are here now into whatever we're doing until such time as there's a change down the road. So I'm going to speak to that bylaw and give some opinions on it to council, but I'm not completely against it. I just don't like some of the wording in it.
And we can find you if we want to.
Oh yes, yeah, I'm hiding down in the basement of the Front Street Emporium. We share a parking lot with Ellison's. Our dispensary is kind of hard to find, but we're very good at what we do, and I think we're the best at dose protocol in British Columbia. We're getting referrals from oncology clinics all across the country, and I think that's the reason for it, and other places too. But particularly, I'll just shout this out here, actually, and I didn't say this. Autistic kids, we've been doing exceedingly well with. That is a very impressive response in autistic kids with cannabis. In fact, I haven't seen a negative effect yet, and all the autistic kids we're helping, I think we have upwards of 30 right now. We also have a lot of epileptic children that we're helping. That's a little bit more complex, but autism, man, there's so much of it out there. This stuff is awesome. It really has potential, on some level. So, children and seniors, I think, matter the most when it comes to this access.
This is, I just want to say this is a very exciting talk. I know that we could have another talk just on the whole entire spiritual aspect of this, because there's a lot of experiences I've had with my neuropeptides unlocking and having amazing discoveries, inventions that have come through to me under this substance. So there's the whole entheogenic spiritual aspect that would be another talk.
Right.
So this is all really exciting. I'm glad we stopped and talked just about the whole scientific aspect of it.
That's very true. Yeah, that is a very important part of it, and we see in the medical treatment of people, particularly with cancer, that people have a spiritual healing as well. That we saw, one example, a mother with metastasized cancer, and not in our dispensary, but helped by a friend's dispensary. She talked about becoming closer with her children, getting more out of the time she was spending with them, and she was taking very high THC medicine. She wasn't stoned at all because it was being used to fight the cancer, but it opened her up as a mother and a wife and a being in that time when others could be distracted by the trauma and the negativity. And she beat it. She's cancer free. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, time is going by, and I'd like to thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
And I think you can stay a few minutes if people have other questions they would like to ask. So,
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot for having me. I'll leave this here just in case anyone's interested. There was an article that we wrote kind of tying the chemtrail phenomenon and the health effects of aluminum oxide nanoparticles to the use of cannabinoids daily. And we have some theories about what it might be doing, especially in the lungs. I'm an inhaler. As it turns out, I do vaporize cannabis a lot, and I know with the aluminum oxide that's being sprayed, there could be potential benefits on that level too.
Are you giving this to us?
Yeah, just food for thought. Yeah, I'll leave it here.